There I stood, heat rising under my skin, watching this woman in her pristine BMW flick a violation notice like she owned the planet. The day Evelyn Parkhurst slapped me with a $200 fine for parking at my own cabin was the same day she handed me the leverage to topple her entire HOA fiefdom. The metallic slam of her brand new gate rang through the autumn air as she blocked my bridge. The very bridge my mourning grandfather built with his bare hands in 1943. Unauthorized vehicle storage, she pronounced, pointing at my truck sitting on family land, passed down through 3 generations. What Evelyn didn't realize was that I owned the only bridge tying her treasured subdivision to the outside world. Every last resident had to cross my property to reach their $400,000 sense homes. Are you dealing with a power-drunk HOA president right now? Drop a comment with where you're watching from, because what happened next will make your revenge daydreams look tame. Let me rewind and explain how this whole mess began. My name's Liam Carter. I'm 34 and a structural engineer who specializes in bridges, which is going to matter a lot to this story. 2 years ago, my grandfather passed and left me his 1940s fishing cabin on Pine Lake. This wasn't just any cabin. It sits on 3 acres of untouched shoreline, reached only by a single-lane bridge over Whisper Creek. Now I travel constantly for work, building renewable energy projects overseas, so I barely got to visit. But that cabin meant everything to me. Grandpa taught me to fish from that dock, showed me how to recognize every bird call echoing across the water, and spent endless evenings telling tales about building that bridge with his own hands. Back in 1943, the area around the cabin had shifted dramatically over the past 5 years. What used to be quiet woods and farmland turned into lakeside estates, one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions with houses that all look like they rolled off the same assembly line. Nice enough, I guess, but not the wilderness refuge Grandpa had envisioned. Enter Evelyn Parkhurst, 52, moved from the city 3 years ago with dreams of becoming the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of standards. She got herself elected HOA president by promising to boost property values and community standards, which apparently meant measuring grass with a ruler and timing how long visitors stayed. Evelyn drove a white BMW X7 that was perpetually spotless, kept her nails perfectly manicured, and carried a leather portfolio like she was closing million-dollar deals instead of hassling neighbors about mailbox colors. She had this way of looking at my place. She'd call it that rustic eyesore when she thought I couldn't hear. The classism was subtle but unmistakable. So when I returned from a 6-month project in Denmark, imagine my shock to find a brand new gate blocking the road to my bridge. Not just any gate. This thing was heavy-duty, with concrete posts and a metallic clang that echoed through the trees every time it shut. Evelyn was waiting, portfolio in hand, that expensive perfume somehow cutting through the pine scent hanging in the air. She handed me an official-looking document claiming the bridge road was now community property based on some recent survey report. According to her papers, road maintenance fell to the HOA, which meant they controlled access. The violation notice was a masterpiece. $2,000 for unauthorized vehicle storage because my truck had been parked at the cabin, plus $50 for every day I didn't comply. The totals were climbing fast. "I'm sure you understand," Evelyn said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We simply can't have unauthorized vehicles cluttering our community roads. It's about property values, really." I ran my fingers along the rough concrete of those new gate posts, listening to Whisper Creek's familiar babble under the bridge. The whole scene felt unreal. This was the same bridge I'd crossed 1,000 times as a kid, the same creek where Grandpa taught me to skip stones. Most newer residents seemed to cheer Evelyn's iron fist style of community control, but the old-timers who remembered the area before the subdivision, they were quietly sympathetic. Ruth Kim, a retired teacher who lived nearest the bridge, slipped me a note as I walked back to my truck. "Check the county record." Something's off. As I drove away, gravel crunching under my tires, I was already planning my next step. See, Evelyn had made one fatal assumption. She figured I was just another pushover resident who'd pay up and hush up. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who builds bridges for a living and knows exactly what paperwork comes with owning one. Evelyn didn't waste time turning the screws. Within a week of our gate encounter, I got a cease and desist letter from some attorney with a fancy letterhead. The legal wording was crafted to intimidate, claiming my continued trespassing was endangering children in the community, which was rich considering no kids even lived near the bridge. The letter demanded I pay the mounting fines, which had somehow ballooned to $450, or face immediate legal action for property damage and public endangerment. Evelyn was also busy at the town coffee shop, spreading whispers about how I was unstoppable and making threats. Neither remotely true, but you know how small-town gossip works. I could have gotten angry. I could have marched over to Evelyn's immaculate house and had it out right there on her manicured lawn. Instead, I did what engineers do best. I gathered data. The county courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like irritated insects. I spent 3 hours digging through property records, running my fingers over aged parchment documents polished smooth by decades of handling. What I found there was absolutely perfect. Grandpa's original 1943 property deed didn't just cover the cabin and the 3-acre lot. It specifically included ownership of the entire bridge structure, described in precise detail down to the timber type and the depth of the foundation pilings. The HOA surveyor had done their homework on everything except the most important piece. They'd conveniently left this crucial detail out of their report. But here's where it gets interesting. The deed contained something called an easement clause that required me to allow reasonable access to anyone needing to cross the bridge. Seemed fair enough. Grandpa was always a reasonable man, but the devil, as they say, lives in the details. The clause specifically defined reasonable as no more than 12 vehicles per day. 12. The current Lakeside Estates subdivision has 47 homes, most with at least 2 cars. Do the math. Knowledge nugget time. Easement rights can be limited by the original deed specifications, and courts almost always uphold the exact language written by the original property owner. Always check the fine print. It's usually there for a reason. When I realized I basically controlled access to half the subdivision, I'll admit I smiled, but Evelyn wasn't done yet. She escalated by installing a security camera pointed right at my bridge, claiming it was for community safety monitoring. Then she started keeping a meticulous log of my supposed violations. Every time I crossed to my own property, she documented it like she was building a federal case. The woman even pressured other residents to sign a petition demanding I cooperate with community standards. Most people signed just to get her to stop knocking on their doors. Evelyn's teenage daughter was at one of these petition drives, and I swear that kid rolled her eyes so hard I worried she might need medical attention. But the community was starting to pay attention. Ruth Kim whispered to me at the post office, with Whisper Creek murmuring below us to mask our conversation, that Evelyn had been asking questions about my finances. Apparently, she wanted to know if I could afford a legal fight. 3 longtime residents approached me privately over the next few days. Tom Hendress, a Vietnam veteran who lived on the lake, told me Evelyn had hassled him about his American flag being too large for community standards. Sarah Walsh, who worked for the local newspaper, mentioned that Evelyn had tried to get her fired for writing an article about property rights. An elderly couple, the Kowalskis, shared how Evelyn had forced them to remove bird feeders because they attracted undesirable wildlife. I was starting to understand this wasn't really about my bridge access. This was about a pattern of bullying that had gone on for months, and I'd just become the latest target. Evelyn had turned our peaceful community into her personal kingdom, ruling through fear and intimidation. The thing is, I'd dealt with petty tyrants before. Construction sites are full of people who think a sliver of authority makes them Napoleon. But Evelyn had made a serious miscalculation. She'd picked on someone who actually knew how to push back, and more importantly, someone with the patience to do it right. As I sat on my cabin porch that evening, listening to loons call across the water, I realized this was bigger than just my access rights. If I let Evelyn steamroll me, she'd keep doing it to other people. Someone had to take a stand. I just happened to be the guy with the bridge. Evelyn's next move was pure financial warfare. She filed a complaint with the county, claiming my bridge was structurally unsafe and demanding an expensive engineering inspection that would cost $3,200. She convinced the HOA board to vote for an emergency assessment under the guise of community safety and began spreading rumors around town that my overseas work was suspicious. Apparently, building renewable energy projects in Denmark made me some kind of secret agent in Evelyn's paranoid imagination. But here's the thing about challenging a bridge engineer on bridge safety. It's like challenging a chef to a cook-off in their own kitchen. I am a bridge engineer. I inspect bridges for a living. This particular one I could assess blindfolded. I spent a Saturday morning giving my grandfather's bridge a full professional inspection. Every joint, every beam, every stress point got photographed and documented. The sound of my boots on those sturdy planks echoed across the water, and the familiar smell of creosote wood preservative took me back to helping Grandpa maintain it when I was 12. What I found was beautiful in an engineering sense. Grandpa had built this bridge to last until the next ice age. It was rated for 20 tons. It could handle a fire truck if necessary. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice that Evelyn's own deck had several obvious code violations visible from the bridge approach. Knowledge nugget: a bridge rated for 20 tons can easily support residential traffic, and you should always get a second opinion before paying for any inspection, especially from someone actually qualified in the field. Evelyn's desperation was becoming obvious. She tried to get the town council to condemn my bridge as a public hazard, bringing along a petition she claimed had unanimous neighborhood backing. Half the signatures were forged, and the rest belonged to people who thought they were signing up for a community barbecue. When that failed, she filed a restraining order, claiming I'd threatened her. Problem was, there were no witnesses, because it never happened. The judge took one look at her so-called evidence and practically laughed her out of court. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting for her next stunt. I was doing my homework. I called several residents whose names appeared on her petition. None of them had seen what they signed. Evelyn had shown up with a clipboard and a story about neighborhood improvements. Here's where things got interesting. I live in a one-party consent state, which means I can legally record phone conversations without telling the other person. So when Evelyn's lawyer called to negotiate, I hit record. 20 minutes in, that lawyer accidentally admitted they knew I owned the bridge, but hoped I wouldn't fight back because most people don't understand property law. He actually said, "Look, we're banking on this guy not knowing his rights." Wrong bet, counselor. My cat, Rusty, had become the unofficial judge of character during this chaos. That orange tabby would sit in the cabin window and hiss every time Evelyn's BMW drove by. Even my cat knew something was wrong with her. The community was slowly waking up to reality. Ruth Kim revealed she was a retired paralegal and offered to help with legal research. Tom Hendress shared his expertise from his Army engineering days. Sarah Walsh, the local reporter, started digging into HOA finances. We held our strategy sessions at Ruth's kitchen table, the smell of her strong coffee filling the air as we pored over documents. During one of those meetings, Sarah discovered that the HOA's financial records were public, and Evelyn had been spending money like a politician on election day. Ruth then dropped the real bombshell. The HOA was spending nearly twice what it was earning. Evelyn had authorized a $40,000 landscaping project that amounted to a few decorative boulders and shrubs. That's when I realized what this was all about. The HOA was broke, and Evelyn thought controlling my bridge would let her charge me monthly access fees. She wasn't just power hungry, she was trying to fix her financial mess by extorting me. As we reviewed the documents under the warm kitchen light, I felt that deep satisfaction engineers get when every piece of a complex problem finally locks into place. Evelyn had no idea what kind of storm she'd started. Evelyn's next act was straight-up sabotage. She hired a contractor to install what she called decorative barriers along the bridge approach, concrete blocks positioned to look like landscaping, but clearly designed to stop my truck from crossing. The grinding sound of the concrete saw at 7 a.m. woke up half the neighborhood, and the dust cloud hanging over the road made it look like a tornado had touched down. When I arrived to find my access completely blocked, Evelyn was there, clipboard in hand, claiming it was a beautification project approved by the architectural committee. Funny thing about that committee, it consisted entirely of Evelyn and two residents, too scared to disagree with her. But this time she made a mistake I could use in court. I filed an emergency injunction demanding the barriers be removed, backed by my original bridge deed and a precise survey proving the road leading to the bridge was entirely on my property. The judge was not amused. When Evelyn tried to argue about community standards and property values, he cut her off mid-sentence and ordered the barriers removed within 24 hours. When she kept talking, he fined her $2,500 for contempt. Standing outside the courthouse afterwards, I took the opportunity to share a little knowledge nugget. You can't block someone's legal access to their property. That's called landlocking, and it's illegal in all 50 states. Courts take access rights very seriously, so always document everything if someone tries to restrict yours. Evelyn's retaliation was as predictable as it was childish. She started a harassment campaign that would have made a middle school bully proud. Anonymous tips to county inspectors about safety violations at my cabin, noise complaints about my truck, which visited exactly twice a month, pressure on HOA members to avoid me. She even tried to get my professional engineering license investigated, claiming I was mentally unstable and a danger to public safety. The state licensing board reviewed my spotless record and basically told her to stop wasting their time. But something interesting was happening in the neighborhood. Tom Hendress organized what he called the Bridge Defense Committee, a group of residents fed up with Evelyn's tyrannical behavior. Ruth Kim dug deeper into Evelyn's background and found that she'd pulled similar stunts in her previous community before moving to Cedar Ridge. She'd been involved in lawsuits, harassment claims, and neighborhood disputes everywhere she'd lived. The woman had a pattern. Meanwhile, Sarah Walsh was investigating the HOA's books and uncovered strange consulting fees and mysterious payments that didn't match any actual improvements. Then came the real twist. My homeowner's insurance agent casually mentioned that if my bridge were ever damaged or destroyed, the HOA residents would be landlocked too. Their property values would collapse, and most insurers wouldn't cover homes inaccessible to emergency vehicles. When I shared that revelation with the Bridge Defense Committee, you could practically hear the collective gasp. Evelyn wasn't just harassing me. She was jeopardizing everyone's property investments. She must have sensed the shift because she called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss what she called the Liam problem. Her PowerPoint presentation, complete with Comic Sans font, which made her supporters cringe, proposed a special assessment to buy out my bridge rights for the insulting sum of $5,000. A bridge that would cost $200,000 to build today, and she wanted to pay me $5,000 for it. The arrogance was breathtaking. The tension in the community was nearing a breaking point. Anonymous flyers appeared around the neighborhood calling me a community threat. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield. Ruth's garden hose was mysteriously slashed in the night. The town coffee shop went dead silent when I walked in. People were taking sides. The peaceful lakeside community my grandfather had loved was now a war zone. All because one woman couldn't stand not being in control. But I had patience, evidence, and the law on my side. Evelyn was digging her own grave, one power move at a time. Sitting on my bridge that evening, listening to Whisper Creek's steady flow beneath me, I realized something simple but powerful. Water always finds its way. No matter how many obstacles you throw at it, persistence wears everything down eventually. Evelyn's downfall was inevitable. Evelyn's desperation reached a new low when she tried to physically damage my bridge at 3 a.m. using a crowbar. The metallic scraping and her heavy breathing were captured crystal clear on the security camera I'd installed after her earlier sabotage attempts. Watching that footage the next morning was almost surreal. There she was, the self-righteous HOA president, vandalizing private property like a common criminal. The damage was minimal. Grandpa's craftsmanship had built that bridge too well for a crowbar to matter, but the intent was unmistakable. I filed a police report but didn't press charges right away. Instead, I shared the footage quietly with the remaining HOA board members, who still had some sense. The effect was immediate. 2 more members resigned rather than be associated with her escalating madness. But Evelyn wasn't finished embarrassing herself. She launched a full-scale smear campaign using fake social media accounts to tarnish my reputation. Phony reviews of my engineering work appeared online. Posts claiming I was dangerous and unhinged spread through neighborhood Facebook groups. The irony? Her efforts backfired spectacularly. Knowledge nugget. Anonymous online defamation is still defamation, and it's traceable. Screenshot everything. Digital evidence disappears fast, but screenshots last forever. The community's disgust was growing by the day. Neighbors began reporting her suspicious nighttime activities. The loyal support she'd relied on was evaporating like morning mist. Meanwhile, Ruth's banking contacts uncovered something devastating. Evelyn had attempted to take out an emergency loan against HOA reserves, without board approval. When the bank refused, she forged board members' signatures. That was the final nail. Embezzlement was one thing. Forgery was a federal offense. Evelyn must have realized the walls were closing in because she made one last desperate move. She called me, voice trembling, offering $15,000 to settle everything quietly. I recorded that call legally, and it was pure gold. Evelyn not only admitted to mistakes with HOA funds, but accidentally confessed to more irregularities I hadn't even found yet. "Look, Liam," she said, voice cracking, "maybe I got a little overzealous about community standards. Maybe some paperwork got mixed up. But we can fix this privately, can't we?" By now, the entire community was on edge. Some feared their property values would collapse under the scandal. Others were furious about paying fees that had lined Evelyn's pockets. The once tight-knit neighborhood was now divided by tensions so thick you could cut it with a trowel. People avoided each other in grocery aisles. Former friends stopped speaking. Evelyn had poisoned the entire community's trust, but even then a few brave residents began coming forward with their own stories. Harassment, extortion, intimidation, all the way back to her first year as HOA president. Her last real threat came one evening, completely unhinged. She called me screaming, promising to destroy my career if I didn't drop the case. She claimed to have connections who could ruin me and said she'd fabricate safety violations if necessary. The woman was completely detached from reality. Facing criminal charges, abandoned by her family, she still thought intimidation could save her. I documented every incident meticulously, building a timeline of her escalating instability. My calm, measured responses contrasted sharply with her unraveling. Then came her final humiliation. At 2 a.m, she called county emergency services, claiming my bridge was collapsing and endangering the community. Sirens tore through the quiet night as fire trucks, ambulances, and police cruisers roared toward the bridge. I got a call from Fire Chief Ramirez at 2:47 a.m. "Liam, we got reports of a structural failure at your bridge. Can you come assess it?" When I arrived, Evelyn stood there in her bathrobe, pointing dramatically at the bridge and babbling about cracking noises. The fire chief, a no-nonsense guy, looked at her, then at me. "You're the engineer, right? Mind taking a look?" 10 minutes later, after inspecting every beam, I confirmed the bridge was flawless. Ramirez turned to the crowd and said, "This bridge is safer than most county roads." Evelyn's credibility died right there in front of everyone. "Ma'am," the fire chief said flatly, "filing false emergency reports is a crime." But the true explosion came the next morning when the state audit finished. The findings were staggering. $31,000 in unexplained expenses, all traced directly to Evelyn's personal accounts through fake invoices for consulting. Knowledge nugget: every digital transaction leaves a trail, and forensic accountants are relentless bloodhounds. Embezzlement often starts small, but snowballs fast when no one's watching. Evelyn's breakdown after that was complete. She began accusing random neighbors of conspiracies, leaving paranoid notes on doors, claiming I was part of a deep state plot to destroy suburban life. Her husband had already left with their kids, and even her die-hard supporters backed away. Then something incredible happened. The community turned the symbol of division, the bridge, into a symbol of unity. Residents organized Bridge Appreciation Day. Families brought picnics, children chalked art along the bridge, and people laughed together for the first time in months. Sarah's story hit the regional news, then went viral with the hashtag #BridgeJustice. HOA reform advocates cited our case as the perfect example of unchecked power gone wrong. Evelyn became infamous nationwide as the HOA president who tried to steal a bridge. Legal consequences came swiftly. The state attorney general filed criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. The HOA sued for restitution. Her real estate license was revoked. The IRS started investigating her unreported income. As I sat on the bridge at sunset, watching light glint off the water, I realized it had never been about me. It had been about showing that ordinary people could fight back and win. Evelyn had tried to turn my inheritance into her personal empire. Instead, she destroyed her own. The town hall was packed tighter than a concert crowd. Nearly 200 people crammed into a space meant for half that number, with news cameras set up in the back and reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads. The mayor had called this emergency meeting after Evelyn's arrest hit regional headlines, and everyone was eager to see how this saga would end. I walked up to the podium, strangely calm for someone about to expose months of corruption in front of half the county. My presentation was simple but devastating. A timeline of harassment, copies of my original bridge deed, and financial documents showing exactly where the HOA's money had gone. 6 months ago, I began, I thought I was just dealing with an overzealous HOA president. What I discovered was systematic theft, harassment of residents, and abuse of power that turned our neighborhood into a dictatorship. The room went silent. Every word landed heavy. Every photo and timestamp I displayed painted a clearer picture of Evelyn's corruption. Evelyn sat in the front row, flanked by her court-appointed attorney and a county sheriff's deputy. She was technically out on bail, but her lawyer had advised her not to speak. That lasted about 5 minutes. When I played the recording of her bribery attempt, her own voice admitting she'd made mistakes with HOA funds, she shot to her feet, red-faced, shouting accusations. "This is all a conspiracy! Liam planned this from the beginning!" Her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she was beyond reason. She pointed at me, then at the crowd, ranting that everyone was out to get her, that I had somehow forced her to embezzle money. The woman was unraveling right there in front of 200 witnesses and 3 TV cameras. "Mrs. Parkhurst," the mayor said firmly, "you're out of order. Please sit down." "Out of order," she screamed. "I'll show you out of order." That's when I delivered the line I'd been saving. "Evelyn, the only thing you built in this community was a criminal empire funded by your neighbors' HOA fees. The only thing I destroyed was your ability to keep stealing from them." The crowd erupted in applause. Even her former supporters clapped. Camera flashes lit up the room, capturing the exact moment a petty tyrant was exposed. Ruth took the microphone next, explaining how her legal research had revealed the fraudulent property claims. Tom described how Evelyn had harassed veterans over flag displays. 3 more residents shared their own stories of intimidation. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't about one bridge. It was about years of unchecked power and abuse. Sheriff Martinez stood to outline the criminal charges: embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and filing false police reports. The state investigator added that federal authorities were looking into tax violations, and an FBI representative confirmed an inquiry into possible mail fraud tied to fake HOA documents. Judge Preston, attending as a community member, announced a restraining order banning Evelyn from HOA property and meetings, and requiring her to surrender all HOA documents and remaining funds. The media frenzy was intense. Reporters asked about property rights advocacy. National HOA reform groups contacted me about testifying before state legislatures. The story went viral under the hashtag #BridgeJustice, with thousands of people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Evelyn's final humiliation came when Sheriff Martinez led her away in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. The woman who'd ruled through fear was now the face of suburban corruption. Kids who'd once been scared of her angry glares actually waved as the patrol car drove off. Inside the hall, the atmosphere shifted. People who hadn't spoken in months hugged, apologized, and started to heal. The smell of coffee mixed with the hum of conversation as residents planned the community's recovery. For the first time in a long while, Cedar Ridge felt like a neighborhood again. Within a month, the transformation was incredible. The community elected a new HOA board, unanimously choosing Ruth as president. They asked me to serve, but I politely declined. I'd had enough HOA politics for a lifetime. Evelyn's legal fate played out exactly as expected. She pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud, earning 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. The court ordered her to repay $47,000 in restitution. Her real estate license was revoked, and her husband filed for divorce before she was even sentenced. But the true healing came from within the community itself. That October, 1 year after she tried to block my bridge, I organized the first annual Bridge Festival. Families picnicked by the water, kids decorated the bridge with chalk art, and we raised $8,000 for local veterans programs that Tom helped select. The most touching moment came when Evelyn's teenage daughter showed up with a handwritten apology letter. She'd watched her mother's downfall in horror and wanted to make things right. I made her the first recipient of a new engineering scholarship fund the community helped me establish. I decided to stay in Cedar Ridge for good, opening my own engineering consulting firm that focuses on small-town infrastructure. I even launched a property rights education website that's already helped dozens of other neighborhoods stand up to HOA abuse. Sarah's reporting won a regional journalism award. Ruth's meticulous casework is now studied in paralegal programs. Tom turned his experience into a consulting service that helps communities organize against corruption. The Bridge Defense Committee evolved into a permanent citizen advocacy group that meets monthly, still at Ruth's kitchen, with Rusty the cat purring contentedly nearby as the official mascot. Evelyn's old house was foreclosed and turned into a community garden. There's something poetic about vegetables growing where toxicity once ruled. Kids now laugh and play among the sunflowers. New families have moved to Cedar Ridge, drawn by the story of a town that stood together. 6 months later, the numbers told the story. HOA finances balanced, 0 harassment complaints, and property values actually up. The county officially declared my grandfather's bridge a historic landmark, protected for generations to come. Standing there now, hearing children's laughter echo over Whisper Creek and smelling barbecue smoke drift through the autumn air, I realized this was never really about land or fines or gates. It was about whether ordinary people would let fear silence them or stand up for what's right. Sometimes it only takes one person to spark courage in everyone else. My grandfather built a bridge strong enough to outlast storms. Turns out it also carried a community across its darkest moment, straight into something better.